As you mentioned, some without a context for ancestor reverence or relationship with the ancestors sometimes assume that the ancestors exist only in the past, or that because their recent blood ancestors are unhappy or harmful people, that the ancestors are best avoided. Can you share about the ways in which the ancestors themselves also change and evolve, and maybe something about the process you refer to as ancestralization?
Well, first of all, I always like to tell people that, you see, we all become a lot wiser after we're dead. Why? Simply because the modus operandi of the existence in the other realm is not to be likened to the one here. Besides, they're two different dimensions. They're two different frequencies of vibrations, and therefore there's a kind of illumination, an epiphany that followed the death that transits the person from the fleshly existence to the energetic existence. And this has to be taken seriously because we tend to create so many compartmentalized spaces to fit various people in. For instance, in this dimension, you know, once you make a mistake, you always refer to from the perspective of that mistake. There is that unspoken assumption of the unredeemability of the human being. That's why, criminal remain criminal the rest of their life. That is why people live their life trying to avoid having a record, record. The problem was that is what eventually stretches itself to the other world, so that ancestors, that is to say, the dead forebears who, during their lives, were, less than wise, made mistakes that a lot of other people paid for, and so on and so forth, are still kept within that kind of framework, as if even death didn't redeem them. Maybe that's the reason why the main religious creed in Western culture, namely Christianity, tend to come with two worlds. One is hell, where nobody want to go, but unfortunately most people wind up there, and heaven, in which there's a limited amount of space for everybody. The point I'm trying to make here is that it is important that we detach ourselves from the thought that ancestors who once had a record in this dimension are still carrying that same frequency in the other. And that more often than not, the one so-called ancestor we have bigger problem with are the one who are likely to be on a standby to radically invest themselves in righting what was wrong during their existence in this plane. So they become a much more vibrant asset, unfortunately in use most of the time, because those they're directly connected to, namely their descendant, are shopping for other type of ancestors, trying to find refuge there, simply because they're still stuck in this dysfunctional merry-go-round in which they see their forebears as totally unreliable and therefore irredeemably doomed. So they're seeking redemption somewhere else. The issue that I see that needs to be dealt with as quickly as possible is linked to a form of healing or another. And that's the reason why I bring the diagram model of ancestralization, in which there is room indeed to show an acknowledgement to the dead by way of escorting them to what my culture believes is the place of their empowerment, the realm of the dead. And from there, to give them the news of this dimension, with the strong expectation that they need to intervene now that they are in a place of empowerment. And so I found that this model at least could begin to give people a chance to at least attempt something, to try something, as opposed to working hard, investing themselves in the perpetuation of dysfunction, as if somehow this down the road is going to make things right. It is an elder saying that the piece of log does not become a crocodile because you keep it in the water long enough. And so it's not by denying the ancestor that sooner or later things are going to get better. They actually get worse, you see.
Malidoma, if I understand you right, I hear you saying that two things I hear is that death is an opportunity for the one dying to become much more conscious or awake, perhaps through the assistance of rituals of ancestralization or in other ways, and that those recent ancestors who may not have lived in a very healthy way, that there might be a blessing in that they may be especially motivated to work for the well-being of the living.
You got it. Mm-hmm. It is important to stress this point because it has to do with the fact that we are indeed on a standby for delivery of blessings coming from that side, and our refusal through various attitude towards the ancestors is delaying our healing, basically. And if it is true what they say, that as below so above, or as above so below, I don't know which one is first, therefore we have to realize that the intensification of the human crisis might be an echo of an unsustainable and bearable crisis going on in the other world. That is a direct result of the severance of the line of connection between the two worlds, one that is quite necessary, because the idea of community, of family, with respect to continuity, has always been linked to two worlds, this world and the other. One world cannot enjoy harmony without the proximity of the other, without fusion with the other. And this is why we cannot successfully implement community without the presence of the dead, the presence of the ancestors in there.
With the exception of Native American peoples, many Americans are relatively recent arrivals to this continent, and as a culture, it's fairly common to relocate from one side of the country to the other. How are ancestors connected to spirits of place and of the land? And how might the history or tendency towards travel in this country contribute to or even be a sign of disconnection from our ancestors?
Well, let me first correct that with an addition that modern mobility is symptomatic of the psyche sense of homelessness, more so than the sense of disconnection with ancestors, because that one is taken for granted. The issue that is in effect now is that these recent arrivals have indeed put on their record the perpetration of what we may call inhumane atrocities and other, as part of their desire to take over places that have nothing ancestral to them, directly at least. The resulting effect of that is something they forgot, that has to do with the fact that having left a place that has the signature of ancestry, and therefore underscoring identity, and finding oneself in a place other than that, simply raises the issue of displacement, of course, or misplacement. And when that takes place, the issue is more about what is the connection between the self as a newcomer and the place of destination, the place of arrival. In Nagara culture, of course, there is the assumption that a newcomer is, quote unquote, a stranger, and therefore a guest of the Earth Mother, the Earth Spirit, which is why a stranger is considered a sacred person. A stranger is sacred because first that person has moved out of one place and has arrived in a different place that bear its own signature and its own energy. My sense is that although it is possible, remotely speaking, to become a member of the new place, I'm not quite familiar with the procedural forms associated with that. But I don't reject the possibility of it. But one thing that still remained very potent in this maneuver is the need for a certain respectful approach to the new place, given the fact that no place is without its spirit guardian. If that is the common belief, we have first to pay attention as to who should you check in with upon arriving at a new place. As part of the self-care project, in order to gain the kind of acceptance resulting in the sort of well-being that perhaps will result in becoming, spiritually speaking at least, a citizen of the new place. Yeah. And so there is indeed a huge problematics associated with this that can be seen in the relatively reckless mobility that modernity tend to associate with.